When she first walked onto that big shining stage, hardly anyone in the audience believed she belonged there. The lights were bright, the crowd was buzzing, and the judges sat behind their desk waiting for the next performer. People had already seen singers who looked the part, young, stylish, and full of confidence. But this woman was different. She wasn't dressed like a star. Her hair was messy, her clothes were plain, and she walked with a bit of nervousness in her steps. Some people in the audience chuckled softly when they saw her. A few even whispered to each other, wondering why she had come to such a big talent show in the first place. But she didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did and simply chose to ignore it. She stood there holding the microphone tightly in her hands, as if it were the only thing giving her courage. One of the judges leaned forward and asked in a polite but slightly amused tone, "What's your name?" She smiled warmly and answered in a quiet, almost shaky voice. Her accent was strong, her words humble. The judges exchanged glances, already expecting this to be one of those auditions that would end with a few awkward moments and polite claps. Then came the next question. "And what are you going to sing for us today?" When she said the name of the song, an old emotional classic, a few people in the audience raised their eyebrows. It was a song that needed real power, deep emotion, and perfect control. It wasn't something you could fake. It wasn't something that could be carried by charm or good looks. "All right then," said the judge, leaning back in his chair. "Let's hear it." The music started softly, echoing through the hall. The woman took a deep breath. For a second, the entire room seemed to hold its breath with her. But before a single note left her lips, there was still doubt everywhere. You could feel it in the air. The judges looked almost ready to cringe. The crowd waited with low expectations. She had spent most of her life being underestimated. People often looked at her and saw someone ordinary, someone who didn't fit the image of a star. She had grown up in a small town, where she was known mostly as the quiet woman who sang in church or at local events. Music had always been her escape, her way to express all the things she couldn't say out loud. For years, she had dreamed of singing on a big stage. But every time she mentioned it, people laughed or told her it was too late, that such dreams belonged to the young and glamorous. Still, she never gave up. She practiced every day, even when nobody was watching. She sang to herself, to her mirror, to the walls of her small home. Her voice was her friend, the one thing that never turned its back on her. Now, standing in front of the crowd, she thought of all those lonely nights of practice, of all the times she had been told no. This was her one chance to prove she was more than what people saw on the outside. The intro of the song continued to play. Her heart was racing so fast she could almost hear it over the music. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were calm. She had promised herself that no matter what happened, she would finish her song with dignity. Then she opened her mouth to sing. Before her voice came out, the camera caught one of the judges rolling his eyes slightly, as if to say, "Here we go again." The audience didn't expect much either. Some people even leaned back in their seats waiting for another forgettable performance. But they didn't know what was coming. The moment she sang the first line, the entire room froze. Her voice was pure, strong, and full of emotion. It wasn't just singing, it was storytelling. The power in her tone carried the pain, hope, and beauty of someone who had lived through years of being unseen. In that very instant, the laughter disappeared. The smirks faded. Every single person in the audience went silent, their eyes wide with surprise. The judges' expressions changed almost immediately, from doubt to shock, then to awe. No one had expected that voice to come from her. She sang with her eyes closed, completely lost in the music. For her, this wasn't about fame or proving anyone wrong. It was about finally being heard, about showing that her dream mattered, even if it took her a lifetime to reach that stage. Her voice filled the theater, reaching the highest corners of the hall. The sound was so beautiful that even the most skeptical people couldn't help but be moved. Some smiled in disbelief. Others wiped their eyes. When she reached the chorus, her confidence grew stronger. Her posture straightened, her voice soared higher. And for the first time that night, she looked like she belonged on that stage. The judges looked at each other, smiling now not mockingly but in admiration. The same man who had smirked when she walked in now sat with his mouth slightly open, as if words had escaped him. By the time she hit the final note, the room was in complete silence again. not because they weren't impressed, but because they were speechless. And then, as if a wave had passed through the crowd, everyone rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, shouting her name. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked out at the sea of people standing for her. The same people who had doubted her minutes ago were now giving her one of the biggest standing ovations in the show's history. In that moment, she didn't think about the years of rejection or loneliness. She didn't think about the whispers or the judgment. She only felt peace, and gratitude. For the first time, she knew that the world finally saw her for who she truly was. The judges took turns giving their feedback, each one more emotional than the last. One judge said softly, "I think we all were surprised tonight in the best possible way." Another added, "That was incredible. You just reminded us why we love this show." Even the toughest judge, known for his cold honesty, leaned forward with a smile and said, "When you walked on stage, we weren't expecting much, but you've just taught every single person here a lesson. Never judge a book by its cover." The crowd cheered louder, agreeing completely. The woman smiled, her face glowing with joy. She gave a small, humble bow and whispered a quiet thank you. It was clear she meant it with all her heart. As she walked off the stage, she looked back one last time. The judges were still smiling and the audience was still clapping. She knew that her life had just changed forever. Behind the curtain, one of the crew members patted her on the shoulder and said, "You did it." She nodded, still in disbelief. After all those years of being overlooked, all the pain and hard work, her dream had finally come true. And it all started because she dared to believe in herself, even when no one else did. That night, as she left the theater, she didn't care about fame or headlines. She just felt proud. Proud that she had stood up, faced the world, and let her voice tell her story. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. When she stepped off the stage that night, her hands were still trembling. She could still hear the sound of applause echoing in her ears. It felt unreal, like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. For years, she had lived quietly, unnoticed by most, and now suddenly all eyes were on her. As she walked through the backstage area, people stopped to congratulate her. Some gave her warm hugs, others just looked at her with amazement. "You were amazing out there," one of the crew members said, still smiling. Another added, "You just made history." She blushed, unsure how to respond. All she could say was, "Thank you." It felt strange to hear those words, "and you made history." She never thought she would be someone people remembered. When she reached the waiting area, she sat down and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, she felt light, as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted from her heart. Her whole life, people had looked at her and assumed she wasn't capable of much. But in a few short minutes, she had proved them all wrong. A producer came up to her with a wide grin. "You have no idea what just happened out there," he said. "That performance, people are going to talk about it for a long time." She smiled shyly, not really believing it. She thought maybe it was just a nice thing to say. But the producer was right. That night was only the beginning. A few days later, something extraordinary happened. Her audition was aired on television, and within hours it spread everywhere. People who had missed the live show watched it online, and soon millions of viewers around the world had seen it. The clip of her performance was shared again and again. It was on news channels, social media, and even in people's homes where families gathered to watch the woman who surprised the world. At first, she didn't understand how big it had become. She still lived in her small town doing her usual things, feeding her cat, going to the store, saying hello to neighbors. But suddenly, when she walked outside, people recognized her. They waved, smiled, and some even asked for photos. "You're that woman from the show," they would say with excitement. "You were incredible." She would blush and reply softly, "Thank you." Soon reporters started visiting her hometown. They wanted to know who she was, where she came from, and how she learned to sing like that. Cameras followed her around, asking questions she wasn't used to answering. It was overwhelming, but she handled it with grace. She spoke honestly, saying that she had always loved singing but never imagined the world would care to listen. The story touched millions. People felt connected to her because she represented something real: hope, courage, and the idea that it's never too late to follow your dreams. Everywhere she went, people told her how much her story meant to them. One woman said, You made me believe in myself again." Another man told her, "I showed your video to my daughter. You gave her courage to sing at her school concert." Those words meant more to her than anything else. She never set out to become famous. All she wanted was a chance, a moment to share her voice. But now her story was giving hope to people she had never even met. As weeks passed, the media couldn't stop talking about her. Her name appeared in newspapers, magazines, and television programs across the world. People called her an overnight sensation, though in truth, it had taken her a lifetime to get there. She received invitations to perform on big shows, and everywhere she went, audiences welcomed her with love and respect. Even the same judges who had doubted her now spoke proudly about her transformation. During interviews, she often said, "I didn't expect any of this. I'm just the same person I was before. I'm still me," and she meant it. Despite the fame, she remained humble, kind, and grounded. But fame, as wonderful as it seemed, also came with challenges. Suddenly, her quiet life wasn't so quiet anymore. Reporters waited outside her home, cameras flashing whenever she stepped out. People she had never met wanted to know everything about her. Some even criticized her looks again, now that she was famous. At first, those comments hurt. She had thought that people's opinions wouldn't matter anymore. But sometimes the words still stung. There were nights when she sat alone in her room, wondering if she was ready for all of this attention. But every time she felt unsure, she reminded herself why she started singing in the first place. Not for fame, not for approval, but because music was her heart. Singing made her feel alive, and no one could take that away from her. One morning, she woke up to find that her video had reached tens of millions of views online. People from all over the world were talking about her. Some called her performance a miracle. Others said it was a moment that reminded everyone not to judge by appearances. She smiled quietly when she read those words. For once, she felt seen, not for how she looked, but for what she carried inside. Soon, she was invited to perform again on the show, this time as a returning contestant in the semifinals. When she stepped onto the stage, the crowd greeted her with loud cheers. Unlike the first time, there were no smirks, no whispers, no laughter, only admiration. She wore a soft, elegant dress, and though she still looked like the same humble woman, there was something different in her eyes. Confidence. Peace. She knew now that she didn't need to prove anything. She just needed to sing from her heart. The music began, and once again, her voice filled the hall like sunlight breaking through clouds. Every note carried emotion, strength, and truth. The audience listened in silence, completely lost in the beauty of her song. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. The judges stood up once more, their smiles genuine and proud. One of them said, "The first time you sang, you shocked us. Tonight you reminded us why we fell in love with your voice in the first place." She felt tears welling in her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you." After the show, she walked outside to find fans waiting with flowers and letters. Some held handmade signs that read, "You inspire us." Others simply said, "Thank you for being you." She smiled, signed a few papers, and spoke kindly to each person, never rushing anyone away. She had waited her whole life for moments like this, and she wanted to share them with everyone. That night, as she sat alone in her room again, she looked out the window at the quiet street below. Everything had changed, yet somehow she felt the same. She still lived in her small town, still had her same cozy home, still sang to herself when no one was around. But now, she carried something new, the belief that dreams, no matter how delayed, can still come true. Sometimes she thought about that first audition, the one where people laughed before she sang. It didn't make her angry anymore. In fact, she felt grateful, because if they hadn't doubted her, the impact of that moment wouldn't have been as powerful. She realized that sometimes life gives you moments of doubt, just to make your victory shine brighter. Her story had become more than a single performance. It was a message, a reminder to never underestimate anyone, to never give up, and to never stop believing in yourself. Even though she had faced laughter, judgment, and fear, she had turned all of it into music. And that music had reached hearts all over the world. That was her real success, not the fame, not the cameras, but the way her voice made people feel. And as she looked up at the night sky, she smiled softly to herself and whispered, "This is just the beginning." Fame came faster than she could ever imagine. One day she was an unknown woman from a small town, and the next her face was everywhere. News channels called her a global sensation. Her performance had crossed borders, languages, and generations. People from countries she had never even heard of were talking about her. Her phone rang endlessly. Interview requests, invitations, record deals. She had never been so busy in her entire life. For someone who used to spend quiet evenings at home humming to herself, this new life felt like stepping into another world. At first, it was exciting. She traveled to big cities, stayed in hotels, and appeared on famous talk shows. Hosts smiled and said, "You're the woman who surprised the whole world." She laughed shyly, never quite knowing what to say. She still couldn't believe it, but behind her gentle smile, she sometimes felt overwhelmed. The lights, the cameras, the noise. It was all so different from her quiet little home. Some days she missed her old life. The peaceful mornings, the familiar streets, the neighbors who knew her as just another face in town. Still, she reminded herself that this was her dream. She had waited her entire life for this chance, and now she was finally living it. One morning, she sat in a hotel room staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her team was preparing her for another appearance on makeup, hair, outfit. People moved around her, chatting, fixing lights, checking sound. But she sat silently, lost in thought. "I never thought I'd come this far," she said softly to herself. Her assistant standing nearby smiled. "You've worked hard for this. You deserve every bit of it." She nodded, still unsure if she believed that. In her heart, she was still the same woman who used to sing alone in her small living room. The world saw her as a star now, but she didn't feel like one. She still felt ordinary, and maybe that was what made people love her even more. A few weeks later, she got a call that changed everything again. She had been invited to perform in the finals of the talent show, the biggest night of her career. Millions of people would be watching live from all over the world. It was the moment she had dreamed of since childhood. When she heard the news, her heart skipped a beat. Excitement mixed with fear. "The finals?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," her producer said with a smile. "You're one of the favorites now. Everyone is waiting to hear you sing again." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind full of thoughts. What if she messed up? What if people expected too much this time? She remembered how the world had been stunned the first time she sang. That moment had been perfect, but could she do it again? She got out of bed, walked to the window, and looked out at the city lights. "You've already come so far," she whispered to herself. "Just sing from your heart like you always do." The days leading up to the finals were intense. Rehearsals, interviews, sound checks. Everything had to be perfect. Every time she practiced, she gave it her all, pushing through the nerves. But deep inside, she was scared. Not of losing, but of disappointing the people who now believed in her. She knew that millions were rooting for her, people who had found hope in her story, who saw her as proof that it's never too late to follow your dreams. She didn't want to let them down. On the day of the final performance, she woke up early. Her heart was beating faster than ever. As she got ready, she looked at herself in the mirror once more. Her hair was neatly styled, her dress elegant but simple, just like her. She smiled softly and whispered, "Let's do this." Backstage, the atmosphere was electric. Other contestants were stretching, practicing, whispering last-minute prayers. The producers ran around, giving instructions, checking cameras and lights. The sound of the crowd outside was already loud. Cheers, claps, shouts of excitement. She stood quietly in one corner, holding her microphone, her hands slightly shaking. One of the crew members came up and said, "You nervous?" She smiled faintly. "A little," he grinned. "Good. That means you care." When it was her turn, she took a deep breath and walked toward the stage. The bright lights hit her face again, and the sound of the crowd washed over her like a wave. The same judges sat before her, the same ones who had smirked that first night. But this time there were no smirks. Only smiles. Genuine smiles. She stood in the center of the stage, looked around the massive hall, and closed her eyes for a moment. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for her whole life. The music began slow and soft. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm. When she opened her mouth and began to sing, the room seemed to disappear. Her voice was calm but powerful, delicate yet strong. Every word carried meaning. Every note carried emotion. The audience was silent, completely lost in her performance. Even the cameras, the lights, the noise, everything faded into the background. It felt like she was singing directly to the hearts of the people watching. Halfway through the song, her voice grew stronger, deeper, more emotional. The judges leaned forward, listening intently. The crowd sat frozen, their faces filled with admiration. She wasn't just singing a song, she was telling her story again. Every struggle, every lonely night, every doubt, it was all there, hidden in her voice. When she reached the final note, she held it perfectly, strong, steady, filled with feeling. The hall stayed silent for a few seconds. Then suddenly the crowd erupted into applause. People stood up from their seats, cheering, clapping, shouting her name. The judges rose too, giving her another standing ovation. Some had tears in their eyes. It was a moment of pure magic. She smiled, tears shining in her own eyes. She took a small bow, whispering, "Thank you," into the microphone. She had done it again. After the show, she went backstage, still shaking with emotion. Her team rushed to her, hugging her, celebrating. One of them said, "You were amazing. That was even better than your first performance." She smiled, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to give it my best." Later that night, as she sat alone in her dressing room, she felt a quiet peace settle over her. The noise of the crowd was gone, replaced by silence. She looked down at her hands. The same hands that once held a microphone in a small church. The same hands that had washed dishes and done simple chores in her hometown. Now, those same hands had held a microphone in front of millions. She took a deep breath, trying to take it all in. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "this moment will stay with me forever." When the results were finally announced, she didn't win the first place. But it didn't matter. In the hearts of the audience, she had already won. The crowd cheered for her louder than for anyone else. People shouted her name as she walked off the stage. Later, one of the judges said to her backstage, "You may not have won the trophy, but you've won something far greater, the respect of the whole world." She smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "That's more than I ever dreamed of," she said softly. After the show ended, reporters surrounded her asking how she felt. She answered simply, "I feel happy. I feel thankful. I got to do what I love, and that's all I ever wanted." That night, when she finally returned to her hotel room, she took off her shoes, sat by the window, and looked out at the city lights once again. Everything felt peaceful. Her journey had been full of ups and downs, but she had stayed true to herself. She hadn't changed for fame or money. She had only sung from her heart, and somehow that had touched millions of people. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about her old life, her small home, and the dream that had once felt so far away. She smiled softly and whispered, "Dreams really do come true, if you believe long enough." And with that, she closed her eyes, her heart full of gratitude, her spirit calm, knowing she had given the world a piece of her soul through her song. When the final note of her song faded into the air, something strange happened. For a moment, the entire theater went completely silent. The music stopped, the lights glowed softly, and thousands of people just stood there, breathless, frozen, unable to speak. It was the kind of silence that said more than words ever could. She stood still on the stage, her heart racing so fast she could hear it pounding in her chest. Her hands were trembling, but she kept her posture, waiting for the judges to respond. Then it happened. One by one, the judges stood up. The crowd followed. Within seconds, the hall was filled with thunderous applause. People were shouting, clapping, and cheering. Some had tears in their eyes. The woman who had once been laughed at now stood there, surrounded by the sound of love, respect, and admiration. She smiled shyly, her eyes glistening with emotion. She gave a small bow as if saying thank you without words. The host walked onto the stage, smiling brightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the microphone, "what we just witnessed was something truly special." The camera turned to the judges. One of them leaned into his mic, his voice warm and emotional. "When you first walked out on this stage," he said, "nobody expected what we just heard. But tonight you showed us something powerful. You reminded us not to judge anyone by how they look, but by what they carry inside." The audience roared with agreement. Another judge spoke next, wiping a tear from her eye. "You touched everyone here tonight," she said softly. "That performance wasn't just singing, it was pure feeling. It was honesty, it was truth. You have a gift that comes from the heart. The woman on stage stood quietly, listening, smiling, almost unable to believe that all this was real. Finally, the last judge and the toughest one of them all leaned forward, a kind smile on his face. "When I saw you for the first time," he said, "I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting much. But you've just proven that real talent doesn't care about looks, age, or fashion. You came here and gave us something unforgettable. And for that, I thank you." The crowd erupted once again, louder than ever. People were standing on their feet, waving, clapping, shouting her name. It was a moment that would be remembered for years to come. As the applause went on, she pressed her hand to her chest, trying to hold back tears. She whispered, "Thank you," and gave one last humble smile before walking off the stage. Backstage, people rushed to her. Crew members, staff, other contestants. Everyone wanted to congratulate her. Some hugged her tightly, others simply said, "You were amazing," their voices full of emotion. She nodded, still dazed. "I can't believe it," she said softly. "It feels like a dream." One of the producers smiled at her. "It's not a dream," he said. "You've just touched millions of hearts." When she finally sat down in the dressing room, she took a deep breath. Her reflection in the mirror looked different, not because of fame or makeup, but because of the quiet confidence glowing in her eyes. For years she had felt invisible, but now she felt seen, truly seen, and for the first time. As the night went on, the world outside began to react. People who had been watching the show from home flooded social media with messages of love and support. They replayed her performance over and over again. Comments poured in from every corner of the world. "She made me cry. She reminded me to never give up," that voice. "I'll never forget it." Even people who had never watched the show before found themselves sharing her video. Within hours, her performance became one of the most talked about moments in television history. The next morning, when she woke up, her phone was full of messages. Journalists wanted interviews. News channels wanted to feature her story. People from different countries were sending her letters and emails, thanking her for giving them hope. It was hard for her to take it all in. Just a few days ago, she had been living a quiet, ordinary life, singing to herself in her small home, feeding her cat, walking to the local shop. And now she was an international sensation. But even with all the attention, she stayed grounded. She still smiled the same way, still spoke softly, still treated everyone with kindness. She didn't let the fame change her heart. When she returned to her hometown, the entire community gathered to welcome her. The local bakery, the grocery store, the neighbors, everyone came out to celebrate. People waved flags and held up signs that said, "We're proud of you." She waved back, her eyes full of tears. It was a simple, beautiful moment. The kind of love that comes not from fame, but from people who truly care. Later that evening, she visited her favorite spot, a small park bench under a tree near her home. It was where she used to sit and dream about singing on a big stage. Now, sitting there again, she thought about everything that had happened. She remembered the smirks, the laughter, the doubt, and she remembered how it all disappeared when her song began. That memory still felt magical. It wasn't just about proving people wrong. It was about showing that dreams can survive anything. In the days that followed, her story continued to spread. People from around the world sent her gifts and letters. Many shared their own stories of being judged or underestimated. They told her how her courage gave them strength. She read every letter she could. Some made her smile, some made her cry, but all of them reminded her of something important, that her voice wasn't just her gift. It was a bridge connecting her to millions of hearts. One letter stood out to her. It came from a young girl who wrote, "I used to be afraid to sing because people made fun of me, but when I saw you, I decided to try again. Thank you for giving me courage." She held that letter close and whispered, "That's why I sing." Even the judges who had once doubted her continued to speak about her in interviews. They said her performance was one of the most powerful moments they had ever witnessed on the show. Some said it changed the way they looked at talent forever, and it truly did. After her, the show was never the same. People began to see contestants differently, not just as performers, but as people with dreams, stories, and struggles. Meanwhile, she continued to live simply. She didn't rush to change her life completely. She still liked cooking her own meals, taking quiet walks, and visiting her church to sing softly in the empty hall. Music for her was still about peace, not fame. One night, during a quiet interview, a reporter asked her, "When you stood on that stage for the first time and people laughed, how did that make you feel?" She paused for a moment, thinking carefully. Then she smiled. "It hurt, of course," she said softly. "But sometimes life gives you moments like that. Not to break you, but to test how strong your heart really is. I just chose to sing through it." The reporter nodded, visibly moved. Her honesty was what people loved the most about her. She didn't pretend to be perfect or try to sound like a celebrity. She spoke like someone real, someone who understood pain, fear, and hope. In the weeks that followed, her life continued to change. Record labels reached out to her, and she began working on her first album. The songs she chose were full of meaning, stories of love, faith, dreams, and strength. When her album was finally released, it broke records around the world. People couldn't get enough of her voice. But for her, the biggest joy wasn't in the sales or the fame. It was in knowing that her music touched lives. Everywhere she went, people still remembered that moment. The night the judges smirked, the crowd laughed, and then the world went silent when she began to sing. It was more than a performance. It was a lesson in kindness, faith, and the power of believing in yourself. And as her journey continued, she carried that memory with her. The sound of silence that turned into applause. The moment the world finally listened. She had started her story as someone overlooked, but she had become someone unforgettable. The world changed for her in ways she could have never imagined. What began as a single performance on a stage had turned into a story that people everywhere spoke about. A story of courage, dreams, and faith. She had gone from a quiet, unknown woman to a global name. Someone who inspired millions just by being herself. But even as the world celebrated her, she never let fame make her forget who she really was. Deep inside, she was still that same person who once sang alone in her living room, hoping someone would hear her one day. Months passed after her unforgettable performance, but the love people had for her didn't fade. Her first album was released and it broke records all around the world. The songs were full of emotion and honesty, and every note carried a piece of her heart. People played her music in their homes, in their cars, even in hospitals and schools. Some said her voice made them cry. Others said it brought them peace. Many said that listening to her reminded them that they were never too old or too ordinary to chase their dreams. She received invitations to travel and perform in countries she had only ever seen on TV. Everywhere she went, people greeted her with open arms. They didn't see her as just a singer. They saw her as a symbol of hope. At first, she couldn't believe that her story had reached so far. She would often say to herself, "How did all this happen to me?" But deep down, she knew the answer. It wasn't luck or magic. It was the power of never giving up. One evening, she was invited to perform at a special international event. Famous stars from all over the world were there. Cameras flashed. People cheered, and the stage was grander than anything she had ever seen before. As she stood backstage, waiting for her turn, she felt the same familiar nervousness she had felt that very first night. Her heart pounded, her palms were sweaty, and for a moment she wondered if she still belonged there. Then she heard someone say softly, "You can do this. Just sing like you always do it from your heart." She smiled. That was all she needed to hear. When her name was announced, the audience erupted in applause. She walked out slowly, her head held high, her face calm but filled with emotion. The lights were bright, and for a moment she couldn't see the crowd. But she didn't need to. She knew they were out there waiting to listen. The music began, soft, slow, familiar. And when she started to sing, time seemed to stop again. Her voice was rich, clear, and full of life. The room fell silent, just like before. People watched in awe as the same woman who had once been laughed at now held the entire world in the palm of her hand. Not with fame or power, but with her voice. When she finished, the crowd rose to its feet. Some clapped, some wiped away tears. She bowed deeply, smiling with gratitude. After the performance, journalists asked her how she felt standing on such a grand stage in front of thousands of people. She thought for a moment and said softly, "I feel thankful. I feel blessed. But most of all, I feel proud that I didn't let fear stop me." Her words were simple, but they touched everyone who heard them. In the months that followed, she continued to sing, to travel, and to inspire. She visited schools, hospitals and community centers performing for people who needed a bit of hope. Children looked up to her, older people admired her, and everyone who met her said the same thing, that she had a kind soul. But even with all the fame and attention, she never forgot where she came from. She still lived in her small town, in the same house she had before. She still went to the same little shop, spoke to the same neighbors, and attended the same local church. People often asked her why she hadn't moved to a big city or bought a mansion like most stars do. She would smile and say, "Because home is where my heart learned to sing." One quiet morning, she was sitting by her window, holding a cup of tea, watching the sun rise. The sky was painted with soft shades of pink and orange. Her cat sat beside her, purring softly. It was peaceful, the kind of peace she had always loved. As she sat there, she thought about everything that had happened. The laughter, the smirks, the silence, the applause. Every part of it had shaped her story. She realized that sometimes life gives us pain or rejection not to stop us, but to prepare us for something bigger. Her story had become proof of that. That afternoon, she received a letter from a man who had lost his job and was struggling to start over. In his letter, he wrote, "I saw your performance and it gave me courage. I realize that it's never too late to try again. Thank you for reminding me of that." Tears filled her eyes as she read those words. She held the letter to her chest and whispered, "If my voice can help even one person believe in themselves, then that's all that matters." Everywhere she went, people told her the same thing, that her story had changed their lives. And each time she felt humbled, because she never set out to be a hero. She just wanted to sing. Years later, when people looked back at her journey, they remembered not just her voice, but her courage. They remembered how she walked onto a stage filled with doubt, faced laughter, and turned it into silence, the kind of silence that only true beauty can create. Her story was told in documentaries, books, and interviews. But no matter how many people tried to describe it, the real magic could never be put into words. It could only be felt. And even as new talents came and went, her name remained special. She had become a reminder of something timeless, that real talent, real dreams, and real strength don't come from how you look. They come from who you are inside. In one of her later interviews, a reporter asked her, "What do you think was the most important lesson you learned through all of this?" She smiled softly and said, "That it's never too late to shine. Sometimes life keeps you waiting, but that doesn't mean your moment will never come. You just have to believe and be ready when it does." Those words became famous. People quoted them, shared them, and carried them as inspiration. As years passed, her fame slowly settled into something quieter, something peaceful. She no longer needed to prove anything. She had done what she came to do, and more. She had touched lives, changed hearts, and left behind a message the world would never forget. One evening, she returned to that same stage where it had all begun. The theater was empty now, the lights dim, the seats silent. She walked slowly to the center and looked around. It felt smaller now, but in her heart it was still the place where everything changed. She stood there for a moment, imagining the laughter she once heard, the smirks, the lights, the sound of her own voice filling the air. She smiled and whispered to herself, it was all worth it. Then she took a deep breath and softly sang a few lines of her favorite song. Not for an audience, not for applause, but just for herself. Her voice echoed through the empty hall, warm and full of life. It was gentle now, but it still carried the same emotion that had once made the world stand still. When she finished, she looked up toward the ceiling, her eyes shining with peace. "Thank you," she whispered. To the stage, to the music, to life itself. And as she walked away, there was a quiet sense of completeness in her heart. She had proved that dreams don't have an age limit. She had shown that courage could turn pain into power, and that one person's voice, no matter how unexpected, could touch millions. Her journey was more than a story about music. It was a story about believing in yourself when nobody else does, about standing tall when the world doubts you, and about letting your light shine, even when it's dimmed by others' judgment. And that was her true legacy, not just the songs she sang, but the hope she left behind in every heart that heard her voice.